Good evening, brothers and sisters in the Dhamma. The topic of the talk tonight is the history of Indian Buddhism. To give a talk like this, one has to do some research. So I referred to a few books. And the main book that I used is this book called A History of Indian Buddhism by Professor Akira Hirakawa. Why I use this book? Because he's the most popular of the modern scholars on Indian Buddhism. Although he died recently, he's still acknowledged like one of the top scholars, one of the top authorities on Indian Buddhism. Also because he's a Japanese and he has done research on the Chinese books available and also on the Pali books or Sri Lankan books, etc. that are available on the history of Buddhism. So he has compared both Mahayana sources and Theravada sources. So a lot of his what he says is valued by other scholars. That's why there's another interesting book by this Professor Rhys Davids. That's the Literature and History of Buddhism. And there are few others like Warder and all that, but some of those books are a bit old. This one by Professor Hirakawa is comparatively new. Now, he says that it is generally agreed by all or most modern scholars that the Buddha passed away around the year 485 BCE. Which is before Common Era, what they used to call BC, before Christ. So some scholars say it is like 483, some say 484, some say 485, 86, like that, but roughly around that time. And they also generally agreed that the Buddha passed away at the age of 80. So if you work backwards, that means the Buddha was born around 565 BCE. He became enlightened at the age of 29, around 530, and then that's correct. And then he passed away at the age of he became enlightened at the age of 35. Yeah, he struggled from 29 years old until 35. And then he passed away at 485 BCE. Now, a lot of people, we have heard that the Buddha was the son of a king because his father was called Raja Suddhodana. But we read from the suttas, actually, like for example, the Dhammadayada Sutta in the Majjhima Nikaya, it stated that the king of Kosala is Pasenadi, King Pasenadi. And in that sutta, King Pasenadi came to pay homage to the Buddha and praise the Buddha. And he said that the Buddha is 80 years old, just like he is 80 years old. The Buddha is a citizen of Kosala, just like he is a citizen of Kosala. The Buddha is the warrior caste, just like he is the warrior caste, and all these things. So from there we know that the Buddha was a citizen of Kosala. And so since a country has only got one king, and the king was Kosala, so the Buddha's father was not a king. The Buddha's father was one of many Rajas. Raja means somebody from the royal family, royal, what we call the blue blood, the warrior caste. So for example, in our country we have many Rajas and Tunkus. And not all of them are sultans or agong, right? Only one is picked to be the sultan or agong. So in the case also, here Raja Suddhodana is called Raja, not because he's king, but because he belongs to the warrior caste. So some people also say that the Buddha's father was the Sakyan chieftain. That also is not true. If we look into the Vinaya books, it is mentioned that the first 1060 arahants who were enlightened, and in there is a man called Badya. It is mentioned that the Badya was a Sakyan chief, and he was persuaded by his very good friend Anuruddha to become a monk, and finally he became a monk. And because his what we call paramis were very good, a lot of good qualities, within 3 or 4 months he became enlightened, became an arahant. So we know that the Sakyan chieftain was not the Buddha's father, but Badya. So the Buddha's father was one of many warrior caste persons, but it's also mentioned that his father was very rich, very wealthy. That's why his father built 3 mansions for him for the 3 seasons, for the winter, summer and rain season. So the Buddha, from the Gatikara Sutta, we find that he was a monk before, under the Buddha Kassapa. And in that lifetime, he listened to the Dhamma and understood the Dhamma and renounced. Originally, in that lifetime, he was a Brahmin, having attained understanding of the suttas. That means he must have attained right view and entered the stream. And then became a monk. And then after that lifetime, he was reborn in the Tusita heaven and came back as Siddhartha Gautama. And as a small boy, he could enter the first jhana under the Jambu tree. So we know that first jhana must have been attained when he was a monk under the Buddha Kassapa. So if he had already entered the stream and attained the first jhana, it is logical to say that he should have become a Sakadagamin, second fruit attainer, second fruit Arya. That explains why when he came back as Siddhartha Gautama, for no good reason, he left his beautiful wife, left his newborn son, and left his loving parents who pleaded and cried, asked him not to go forth. In front of them, he shaved off his hair, put on the yellow robe and walked out of the house. If that happened to an ordinary person, we say, xiao le lo, chi sin jo, something wrong with him lah. Tiga suku, how can he leave his family like that and go and become a monk, a beggar, and living under the trees at night and all these things and beg for his food and all that. So the only explanation is that he's not an ordinary person. He must have become a Sakadagamin. And then only he renounced. He had to renounce because according to the suttas, when a person becomes a Sakadagamin, he's called a once returner. He comes back as a human being. One last time, he must enter Nibbana. That's why his time was due. That's why he had to go forth. So, at the age of 80, the Buddha passed away. And it is stated that when the Buddha passed away, the Sangha consisted of small groups of beggar monks, mendicants, in central India. This central India means, the Pali word is Majjhima Padesa. In Chinese here, they translated it as Zhongguo, middle country, Zhongguo. So, from there, this misunderstanding arose that all Buddhas are born in China. All Buddhas are not born in China. All Buddhas are born in the middle country or middle India. So through the efforts of Sakyamuni's disciples, Buddhism spread to the south and to the west. It was only later, because of Emperor Asoka, that Buddhism spread far and wide and became a world religion. Now the periods of Indian Buddhism are given as generally as 5 periods. The first one is early Buddhism or original Buddhism. That means the original teachings of the Buddha were practiced. This was roughly for 500 years. From the year the Buddha was enlightened, 530 BCE until approximately 50 BCE, approximately 500 years. This fits very well according to what the Buddha said in the Suttas and Vinaya. Originally, the Buddha did not allow women to go forth as nuns. And later, when he was persuaded many times by Ananda, he finally allowed the ladies to become nuns. But later he told Ananda, he said, Ananda, if today you had not persuaded the Tathagata to allow women to go forth as nuns, the true Dhamma would have lasted 1,000 years. Now the true Dhamma will last only 500 years. So now we see from here, actually the true Dhamma lasted 500 years. It's not that after 500 years there is no more true Dhamma. It's just that after 500 years the Dhamma becomes polluted, mixed with this counterfeit Dhamma, what is known as, what the Buddha calls counterfeit Dhamma, which includes false sutras and all that. So from here we see early Buddhism or original Buddhism lasted from roughly 530 BCE up to 50 BCE. And this includes the time of Emperor Asoka. Emperor Asoka lived around the year 250 BCE. Then the next phase of Buddhism in India is called sectarian Buddhism, Hinayana Buddhism, where there were something like 20 schools of Buddhism, 20 sects of Buddhism. This started around the year 150 BCE, but then it was still not popular yet until about 50 BCE. Then only this sectarian or Hinayana Buddhism became popular until the year around 850 CE, Common Era. That means it lasted about 900, 1,000 years like that, 900 years. So this Hinayana Buddhism or sectarian Buddhism is called Xiao Cheng, Xiu Sing in Chinese. And later I explain why it is called that, not original Buddhism. Then the third phase of Buddhism in India begins around the year 100 BCE. That's the time when Mahayana ideas started to surface. Mahayana teaching started to surface. But they only became popular from the year around 10 CE, 10 Common Era. In Chinese we call Gong Yan, Common Era. Around 10 CE. Up to 200 CE. And then the fourth phase is called later Mahayana Buddhism, which lasted from about 200 CE up to 850 CE. Then the last phase is called esoteric Buddhism. Esoteric Buddhism started around about 600 CE, but they only became popular about 700 CE and lasted up to 1000 or 1001 CE, Common Era. So you find that the last phase is this esoteric Buddhism. Esoteric Buddhism is also called the secret school, where it is transmitted only from the teacher to the disciple, only to select disciples, not to everybody. Now, after the Buddha's time, what happened was, after the Buddha passed away, the Sangha convened the first council a few months after the Buddha's passing. This was called the first council. This council is a translation for the Pali word Sanghiti. Sanghiti means the monks come together and chant together the Dhamma and the Vinaya. Chanting together, that's the meaning of Sanghiti. So this first council was attended by 500 Arahants. And remember Ananda, being the one most familiar with the suttas, because he was beside the Buddha most of the time, he was asked to chant the suttas, and then the Arahants all memorized what he chanted. The aim was to make sure everybody gets the suttas correct, so that it is handed down. Everybody agrees, the Buddha said such and such, instead of everyone having a different version. And then remember Upali was asked to chant the Vinaya. So the 500 Arahants, they have a very good computer up here, and it's chanted just one time, everything memorized. So after that, they transmitted to their disciples, and after that, it was handed down generation after generation, right up to now. So that was the starting point of the suttas and the Vinaya. Then about 100 years after the Buddha's passing away, the monks in a place called Vesali, they were not practicing well. They were not keeping good Vinaya. For example, they were accepting money from lay people, which is against the precepts. And then they were eating after noon. Here noon in Malaysia is about 1 o'clock, when the sun is the highest. After that, we are not supposed to allow. We are not allowed to eat ordinary food. Only certain things considered medicinal value that we are allowed. So they were eating afternoon. And then they were breaking other precepts. And they gave the reason that because their teacher, their preceptor were doing it, so they just follow their teacher and their preceptors. So they think nothing wrong because their teachers and preceptors are teaching them like this. So then one day a monk called Yasa came to their place. This Yasa was a very good monk, a very learned monk, and also a very good practicing monk. Not sure whether he's an Arahant or not. So when he came to this place and then he went to beg for his food, the people not only offered him food, offered him money also. So he refused to accept. And the people asked him why. He said the Buddha doesn't allow monks to accept money. Then they say, how come? The monks here tell us that monks can accept money. So he said, no, not allowed. Then another day when he went for Pindapat, other people also offered him money, and also he refused, and he again had to explain. So very soon a lot of people came to know that this monk is saying cannot accept money, cannot eat afternoon and all these things. So they start to question the resident monks in Vesali. Why this monk says like that and you all say like this? So the monks are very unhappy in Vesali. So they held a meeting to discuss about this monk, Yasa, who is saying things are different from what they say. So they decided expel him. Don't allow him to stay here. So they expelled him. So he went away. So he was not satisfied. He went to meet other good monks, other practicing monks, and told them what happened. So they said, we better go and confront these monks. So they started gathering good monks to come and have a whole a meeting with these monks. And when these monks heard that these good monks were coming to find fault with them, they also started to call other monks to come. So finally, they had a meeting, and that meeting 700 monks attended. So when they held this meeting, they started to quarrel with each other. This side says like that side says like that. So there was no end to that quarrel. So finally they decided, okay, what we will do is we will appoint 4 monks from this side and 4 monks from this side. You select 4 respected monks, we will select 4 respected monks and let them, the 8 monks, decide. So they selected 4 monks, what is written as 4 monks from the east and 4 monks from the west, and these were very well-known and respected Theras, elder monks. So when these 8 monks came together, and then they decided on 10 points of Vinaya. these 10 points of Vinaya, whether a monk is allowed to accept money for himself. And they said no. According to the Buddha said in such and such a book, in such and such a place, in the Vinaya books, the Buddha said it's not allowed. And then whether a monk can eat in the afternoon, they said no. The Buddha says in such and such a place that we are not allowed to eat in the afternoon. And then whether we should follow our teacher's word all the time, and they said no. If what the teacher says or the preceptor says is in accord with what the Buddha says in the suttas and the Vinaya, then we follow him. But if what the teacher or the preceptor says contradicts the Buddha's words in the suttas and the Vinaya, we don't follow him, we only follow the Buddha. So these 10 points were all voted in favor of the stricter monks. So after that the meeting ended. So the stricter monks, actually there are less of them. The more lax monks, there were more of them. So they were not happy, Later they held their own meeting and they said they will not accept all these recommendations of the 8 elder monks. They would conduct themselves according to what they like, according to what they prefer. So in other words, they broke off from these good practicing monks. From here, the first schism started, first schism of the Sangha. The Sangha split into 2 groups. Originally, the Sangha was just one only, but now it's split into 2 groups. This is called the basic schism. In Chinese, they call it the Gen Pen Fen Lie. So, this happened about 100 years after the Buddha's passing away. Now you notice here, these two schools, these 2 sects, the stricter sect is called Theravada. They follow the word of the Thera, the elders. The majority, the other group, where they have more monks, is called the Mahasangika, because their Sangha is bigger. That's why they're called the Mahasangika. So in Chinese, the Theravada is called Sang Chuo Pu or Chang Lao Pai, and the Mahasangika is called the Ta Chong Pu. You notice here, actually, these 2 groups, the only difference is in the practice of the Vinaya. They still acknowledge that the suttas are the words of the Buddha, the Vinaya are the words of the Buddha, except that they want to practice differently, the Mahasangika. So, as time went on, slowly, the later monks, after the Buddha's passing away, the Buddha was not there to guide them. They practiced less and less. And then when they practice less and less, they talk more and more. They begin to cakap banyak. So have a lot of difference of opinions. So these difference of opinions, these are like different interpretations of the Buddha's words in the suttas and the Vinaya. So they interpret the Buddha's teachings differently. Then they start to break up into more sects, more schools of Buddhism, different Sangha groups. And then by the time of Emperor Asoka, which was about 200 years later, or 218 years later, there were another 18 sects formed from the original 2. In other words, there were about 20 sects, 20 schools of Buddhism by the time of Emperor Asoka. But since the time of Emperor Asoka is only about 200 years after the Buddha's passing away, this was still the time of original Buddhism. They were still practicing original Buddhism. It's just that wrong views start to surface. So, in other words, all of them were following the Pali Suttas and the Vinaya. They acknowledge that the Buddha's original teachings are found in the Suttas and the Vinaya.